everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and I like to talk about books, and today I'm going to be giving you thriller book recommendations based on your favorite tropes. There are a large number of tropes that you will see in thriller books. Obviously, not going to cover all of those tropes today, but I thought it would be fun to put together some of my favorite thriller book recommendations organized by common tropes, especially tropes that I enjoy in my thrillers. I have a very large stack of books sitting next to me, so I'm not going to be going super in-depth explaining all of these books. A lot of them I've recommended before in one way or another, although there are some new recommendations on this list as well. But hopefully this is an easy way for you to find book recommendations based off of the types of thrillers that you especially enjoy. So the first trope I'm going to start with is one of my favorite tropes, and that is when there is isolation, locked rooms, everyone's stuck somewhere, maybe there's a storm, anything where it's like closed off and isolated and people are trapped. Usually people start dying, maybe weird notes are being left, maybe a lot of people seem suspicious, but for whatever reason, there's a group of people that are all stuck together and thrilling, crazy things start happening. So the first book I'm going to recommend for this is one I recently read, and that is The Sanatorium by Sarah Pierce. This is a story about this abandoned sanatorium that has been renovated into like this 5-star resort in the middle of the mountains. Your main character is this woman named Ellen, who is a former detective, and her brother invites her to come to this resort with him and his fiance to celebrate his engagement, but she's been estranged from her brother for a long time, so she is a little nervous about it, but she goes anyway. She might have her own motives for going, and when she gets there, there's a really bad storm. They end up getting stuck there, and then the fiance ends up disappearing, as well as another woman ends up disappearing, and things start getting crazy, and Ellen starts to work on the case with her former detective skills. I will say this book is pretty cheesy at times. There are some like laughable moments with how silly some of the clues are laid out, or like Ellen's detective work isn't the best detective work, but I still think it was a lot of fun. I love the storm aspect of something when you're stuck in like a snowstorm or a rainstorm or whatever it is, because you're trapped and like people start disappearing, the cops can't come out to help you, they just got to figure it all out themselves. So while this wasn't like the best written thriller I've ever read, I still thought it was a lot of fun because it had all those same fun aspects of one of these isolation thrillers. If you're really into snowstorm thrillers, you should also check out One by One by Ruth Ware. This is sort of more of like a mystery than a thriller, so don't expect super like twisty, surprising things all the way through. It is more of like a classic mystery feel than a more like modern day action-packed thriller. But this is a story about a group of coworkers who are going on a business trip to this chalet in like France, and then they end up going skiing. There's an avalanche, one of the people disappears, more people start disappearing or showing up dead. There's also a lot of drama going on in their company about potentially being bought out or something to do with like logistical company things that's not as exciting to read about, but that adds tension in the story and connects all of the characters. I will say there's a part of this book towards the end that is very fast-paced, like back-to-back action scene, and you don't know if certain characters are going to make it out, and I thought that was a lot of fun and super thrilling. But this definitely has good like snowstorm isolated thriller vibes, so if that is your thing, then I think you would enjoy this one. I talk about this book endlessly, so I'm not going to drag this out, but No Exit, obviously a great one. A girl gets stuck at a rest stop because it is storming and someone might be a murderer, and she's stuck there with them and has to make her way through the night alive. Super fun, super fast paced. I talk about this book all the time, so if you want to hear more about it, literally watch like any other video of mine. And then another fun one is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This is set on an island over the course of a wedding, and you know someone died, but you don't know who died or who did it, and over the course of the couple of days that the whole party is there for the wedding, you get to know a lot of the characters. Everyone seems sort of fishy, and you're trying to piece together who did it and what they did. They also end up getting stuck on the island with a really bad rainstorm, so it has that same kind of feel feeling of being stuck and isolated. And then the last one I have to recommend doesn't exactly fit in this trope in the most conventional way like the other books do, but that is The Girls I've Been by Tess Sharp. And this is like a bank robbery thriller, and these characters get stuck in the middle of a bank robbery and have to try to make their way out, and it is so much fun. So this is a young adult thriller story. It follows our main character, Nora O'Malley, who has been many girls. She has lived many lives. She grew up with a con artist mother, and so she is used to kind of changing her personality and her name and her appearance throughout her life, and she's got a pretty crazy history. She ends up coming to this bank with her new girlfriend and her ex-boyfriend because they had like a fundraiser event the night before, and they have to come deposit the money for whatever they were doing. And they had a really awkward moment because her ex-boyfriend didn't know that she was dating this girl until the night before when he saw them kissing, but they were like all friends. And so there's just a lot of weirdness in between them right now. And then they go in the bank, and then they get stuck in a bank robbery all together, and they have to try to figure out their way out. And Nora gets to use her con artist skills the whole time. So this is just a ton of fun. There are definitely some darker things talked about in here. It's a little bit heavier, so if trigger warnings are important to you, definitely look into those before picking this one up. But I just think this one was so much fun. It had really high stakes, lots of action, and I really loved Nora as a main character, and just getting to see her use her brain and get out of a bad situation. It was just tons of fun. Next up, this is I feel like a less common trope. I don't think I would say it's like one of my favorite tropes, but when I look back at thrillers I enjoy, this seems to be a common thing in thrillers that I have enjoyed, and that is the inheritance plot. So when there's some sort of money or inheritance at stake that characters are fighting for or up at stake, or that's what kicks off the novel. It's not something I would think about a lot and like seek out in books, but it is something that I've just read a lot, and I've actually enjoyed a lot of books that I've read with that storyline. So the first one is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is a story about a girl who grew up living in a supposedly haunted house. She lived there for a very brief amount of time with her parents before they ended up evading the house, and it became this huge famous story. Her dad wrote a book about it. It's just like really infamous. Everyone knows the story about this house. Some people believe the supernatural experiences, and some people are quite skeptical and don't. And our main character, the girl who did grow up in the house, is skeptical herself because she doesn't remember anything about the experience living in the house. But this story follows her like 20 years later. She's like all grown up now. Her dad passes away, and so she inherits the house and is going to try to like restore it and flip it and sell it. And she goes, and she's like not super worried about it because she's like, yeah, I don't think any of that supernatural stuff really happened. But then she gets there, and then supernatural stuff starts happening. So inheritance isn't necessarily the most prevalent aspect of the book. It is more of like, is there actually supernatural activity happening or not, is the main like trope or plot device that is used. But it all kicks off with the inheritance of this house that she didn't even want in the first place, and it is a ton of fun. Next up is The Cousins by Karen M. McManus, and this one, inheritance, also is not the most important thing about the story, but it ends up being pretty integral to the plot. So this follows a group of cousins whose grandmother disowned all of her children, which are the cousins' parents. And so the family is not super tight-knit. They're pretty dispersed. They had some kind of incident happen with the grandma and her kids when they were all growing up in this like island resort town, and they've all been separated and estranged since then. But the grandma ends up sending letters out to all of the cousins saying she wants them to come work on her resort for the summer, and it's very suspicious and strange that she would do that, but all of their parents really want them to do that because hopefully it will bring the family back together so that they can get the inheritance from their mother. The inheritance aspect of the story is what ends up causing a lot of the problems in the family and a lot of the tension, and it really ties together a lot of the story, but mostly it's just a story about family, and there are some pretty surprising plot twists in this for this to be a YA thriller, so I was pretty impressed. Next up, this book is truly an inheritance-focused thriller, and that is The Death of Mrs. Westaway by Ruth Ware. This is a story about a girl who receives a letter telling her that she is to receive her inheritance from her grandmother passing away. She's gonna get like this money in the house or something, but her grandparents have been dead for a very long time, and so she is like, this mistakenly got sent to me. Don't know how this happened, why they think I'm this person, but I'm low on money, low on luck, and I could take that opportunity. And she is a tarot card reader, so she thinks that she has the skill that it takes to manipulate the situation and be able to ride it out and go claim that inheritance for herself. But then once she goes to do so, she realizes there are some weird things going on, some dark things going on, and it all has to do with this inheritance in this family. It has been so long since I've read this book, but I do remember really enjoying it, and I really do want to read it again. This is like one of Ruth Ware's books that I don't remember super well, but I do remember thinking it was just such a good time. So definitely one on my reread list, but you just can't talk about inheritance thrillers without talking about The Death of Mrs. Westaway. Another book with this trope that I have not read in a long time is The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. This is like the only Lisa Jewell book that I really liked and loved. It's a story about this girl who has been growing up her whole life not knowing her life story, not knowing her family story, what happened to her. But she knows when she turns 25, she's going to receive a letter that's going to make it all clear. She turns 25, she gets the letter, and she's going to be inheriting this very famous, infamous house that was the scene of some murders and some very cult-like things in the past. And so through this book, you're learning about the main character's life and about the history of what has happened in her family and her past and how she got to where she is today. And mainly there's just a lot of mystery around what happened in this house so long ago. When the crime scene was found, there were 3 dead bodies all dressed in black that were posed next to a hastily scrawled note, and then 4 other children that lived there were just mysteriously gone. And then there was also a 10-month-old baby crying in the house when all of this was found. So quite a terrible thing for this character to find herself in the middle of, but a very interesting story, and I think it did a great job of keeping tons of suspense and being super thrilling, and I just really enjoyed the writing of this one. I don't know how I've liked this book so much, but then all of Lisa Jewell's other books have been a dud for me. But if you've tried Lisa Jewell and not liked her other stuff, maybe give this one a try, because I liked it. And then the last inheritance-related thriller recommendation I have is He Started It by Samantha Downing. This is a story about a group of siblings who are being reunited to go on this long road trip together that they took in their past when they were kids. They're taking the road trip again as part of a requirement for getting their inheritance from their grandfather who has just passed away. So in the beginning, things seem fine. This seems kind of nice and sentimental that these siblings who have been estranged from each other are being forced to reconnect, to relive these childhood memories, go on this great road trip again that you went on with your grandfather. Seems like it's a nice thing that he's reuniting them to get them to do this, but there are sinister things going on that involve more than one character in the story. So I don't want to say anything else, I don't want to give anything away, but there are, but just know you can't trust anything or anyone in this story, and it just makes for a very thrilling ride. Speaking of not knowing who to trust, the next trope I want to talk about is just untrustworthiness. I especially like unreliable narrators, but I also just like morally gray characters and thrillers that are so psychologically twisty because you don't know which characters to trust and if you can trust the narrator or even what certain characters are being told or what's portrayed. I just really like being confused and not knowing who to trust. But I don't want to be too specific on the trust elements because I think you could end up giving it away if you talk too much about it. Like if you show a book and say, this book has an unreliable narrator, then that kind of spoils the story. So I'm just going to talk vaguely about thriller books where you don't know who to trust, whether that be your narrator or any other characters that are in the book. And the first one I want to start with is a book I just finished, and that is Every Value Break by Peter Swanson. I have not liked any other Peter Swanson books I've read, but I gave this one 5 stars. I thought it was phenomenal. So this is a story about this couple who are going on their honeymoon into this very secluded, like, island that is like campy, and you go and you don't have any technology. It's supposed to be super romantic, that you just get to go be in the wilderness without any outside distractions after you just get married. But the thing is that right before they got married, the bride was on her bachelorette trip and she ended up having a one-night stand with another man. But after she did that, she was like, all right, it's out of my system. I know I want to be with this guy. I want to marry him. So I'm just gonna keep that a secret. No need for him to know. And then when they go on their honeymoon, that guy she had an affair with shows up. And it was such a good thriller. It was so fun. You honestly have no idea who to trust or what's going on. It is so fast paced. I thought this book was like perfection. I read it all in one day in like one sitting. I hardly did anything else because as soon as I started the book, I just had to know how it was going to end, and it was so satisfying. So I very highly recommend this book. I really enjoyed the audiobook version in particular, so I would also recommend that, but it was just like my idea of a perfect thriller. Like I mentioned before, He Started It by Samantha Downing, also a really good one with like not knowing who to trust, weird things going on, morally gray characters. Don't really need to say anything more, just know that's a pretty big part of this book and it makes it very enjoyable. Next up, I have The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. This is a Jane Eyre retelling, so it follows this character Jane, who is pretty broke, and she is dog walking in a neighborhood, and one day she runs into this guy Eddie, and then he goes out and gets a dog so that she'll be his dog walker, and then they fall in love and they end up getting married. But Eddie's also got a past. He's got a mysterious past. His wife Bee died pretty recently, mysterious circumstances, so that is like lingering over their marriage. She can't help but be curious about that. Everyone in the community seems kind of sketched out by him and how quickly he's moving on and what's going on, and like not really accepting her as part of the group. But there are things that you should learn about Jane too. She's not all that she seems to be. And like I said, I want to be pretty vague, so I'll leave it at there, but lots of secrets in this book from many a people. Next up, another one I read relatively recently is Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. This is a story about a woman who ends up meeting this guy at a bar, they kiss, and then he runs off, and then it turns out he's her boss, and oh yeah, he's also married. So they try to brush off the awkward encounter and just work together like normal people. He's like a new boss, he was just coming in, and then they show up and realize he is her new boss. And then she also starts developing a friendship with his wife and just getting way too entangled in what's going on in their marriage because it is far from a perfect marriage, and she is getting two different sides of the story, and she's got her own story going on, and that's all I really need to say about it. There's also a Netflix show for this book, which I thought was very, very well done. One of the best adaptations I've seen, honestly, in terms of staying true to the story. I really enjoyed the show as well, so also an option is just to watch the show, but I really like doing both. I read the book first. Well, actually, I watched the first episode of the show first to see if I was interested in it, and then I read the book, and then I went back and finished the show. So that's also a good way to test it out if you just want to quickly watch an episode to see if you're intrigued. But definitely some crazy things going on in this book, and it was a very fun time. I know I just said recently that I haven't enjoyed any of the other Peter Swanson books I read, but another Peter Swanson book I read fits this category very well, and that is 8 Perfect Murders. I really love the idea of this story. I just didn't so much love the tone of it, and that really ended up dragging the book down for me, but I really liked the concept. So it's a story about this guy who is a bookseller, and way back in the day, he used to write like blog posts for the bookstore, and he wrote this blog post about the 8 perfect murders in literature and just media and plays and stuff in general. Basically just talking about murder mystery stories where the murder was executed so well that it was like the perfect murder, and the people like wouldn't be caught for that, which is fine, a normal thing to write a blog post about. But now, present day, these murders are like happening right around him, and the cops are very concerned that he might be a part of it. And so he starts being investigated for it, but he also starts trying to figure out what's going on to try to like clear his name, but also help them and figure out why these murders are happening all in his area. So really solid concept, and really does a nice job of morally gray character / not knowing who to trust, but the tone of it is very like noir. So just know that going in. If you don't like that, you might not like the style of this one, like I didn't, but I think overall I still gave it like 3 stars, which is still like a good book. And then lastly is Pretty Little Wife by Darby Kane. This is a story about this couple who are living in this like idyllic small college town, and the husband is like a professor, like a college professor in the town. And recently girls have been going missing. There's like 3 girls gone missing now. The police are investigating, thinking they might be connected, and then the husband goes missing as well. And so everyone's really concerned, but the wife isn't as much concerned as she is confused because she was the last person to see his body and now it is missing. I won't explain that in any more detail to give any spoilers. If you don't understand what that means, I'll let you go in on an adventure. But it is definitely one of those types of stories where there are some shady folks and morally gray characters and high intensity and confusion on who to trust, especially as the wife starts getting mysterious letters and she honestly doesn't know if her husband is dead or alive. So yeah, like I said, lots of fun, lots of action, really fast paced, a little bit cheesy at times, but I can look past that if I'm having a good time with a thriller. So that is it for all of the recommendations I have today. If there are any other thriller tropes you would like to see me give recommendations for, let me know in the comments below and I could do a part 2 to this little series. Like I said, there are tons and tons of more thriller tropes out there, so plenty more I can do in the future. Also, let me know if you have any other recommendations for the tropes that I talked about today, especially if you watch my channel and you know I haven't read it yet. Definitely let me know, because these are some of my favorite tropes that I tend to enjoy in thrillers, so could really use all the recommendations. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!